To be able to see and study undisturbed the processes of nature, I like better the old biblical phrase, mighty works, is an opportunity for which any man might well feel reverent gratitude. And here at last, in this silence and isolation of winter, a whole region was mine whose innermost natural life might shape itself to its ancient courses without the hindrance and interferences of man. No one came to kill, no one came to explore, no one even came to see. Earth, ocean, and sky, the triune unity of this coast, pursued each one their vast and mingled purposes as untroubled by man as a planet on its course about the sun. It is not good to be too much alone, even as it is unwise to be always with and in a crowd. But, solitary as I was, I had few opportunities for moods or to lose and neglect the creeping hours of time. From the moment that I rose in the morning and threw open my door looking toward the sea to the moment when the spurt of a match sounded in the evening quiet of my solitary house, there was always something to do, something to observe, something to record, something to study, something to put aside in a corner of the mind. There was the ocean in all weathers and at all tides, now gray and lonely and veiled in winter rain, now sunbright, coldly green, and marbled with dissolving foam. There was the marsh with its great congresses, its little companies, its wandering groups, and little family gatherings of winter birds. There was the glory of the winter sky rolling out of the ocean over and across the dunes, constellation by constellation, lonely star by star. To see the night sky in all its divinity of beauty, the world beneath it should be lovely too, else the great picture is split in halves, which no mind can ever really weld into a unity of reverence. I think the nights on which I felt most alone, if I paused to indulge myself in such an emotion, were the nights when southeasterly rains were at work in the dark, immense world outside my door, dissolving in rain and fog such ice and snow as lingered on after a snowfall or a cold spell had become history. On such southeasterly nights, the fog lay thick on marsh and ocean. The distant lights of Eastham vanished in a universal dark, and on the invisible beach below the dune, great breakers born of fog swell, and the wind rolled up the sands with the slow, mournful pace of stately victims destined to immolation, and toppled over, each one, in a heavy, awesome roar that faded to silence before a fellow victim followed on out of the darkness on the sea. Only one sense impression lingered to remind me of the vanished world of man, and that the long, long complaints and melancholy bellowings of vessels feeling their way about miles offshore. So that is an excerpt from The Outermost House by Henry Beston, and so far this has been the most beautifully written book that I have read this year. I have been very, very impressed by this little book. It's only 174 pages long, and it is a memoir of Beston's time living in a little house on a narrow spit of sand between the Atlantic Ocean and a marsh on the easternmost beach of Cape Cod in the 1920s. And it is a description of the animals he saw, the fish he saw, the birds that lived all around him, all kinds of birds, terns, ducks, sandpipers, geese. At one point he sees a bunch of swans, which he had never seen swans flying overhead before, owls, hawks, deer, all kinds of just interesting animals, horseshoe crabs, skates, dogfish, little bitty fish that come up on shore, getting away from the bigger fish. This is an account of the storms he stayed through, the ice storms, the thunderstorms. It's a really beautiful book, very well written. And so Henry Beston was born in the 1880s, and he was born in Quincy, Massachusetts. He went to Harvard for a while. He served as an ambulance driver for the French Army in World War I. And at some point, he was able to build a tiny house on this beach in Cape Cod, not too far from Eastham, south of the Nauset Coast Guard Station. Little bitty house, 16 by 20, with, I believe he said, 10 or 11 windows, and 2 rooms, a fireplace, a gas stove, a dresser. Not very much. It's just a little house that he intended to spend parts of the summers in. And during one summer, he decided that he didn't want to leave. He did not want to leave. He just wanted to stay there and observe what was going on throughout the year. And when I looked this up, I was reading a little bit about Beston. Now, apparently this book takes place over 2 years, but it's condensed in the book into 1 year, which is fine by me. Now, this is a complete 4 seasons experience of life on this tiny spit of sand on Cape Cod. Now, if you don't know what Cape Cod is, so Massachusetts is on the eastern seaboard of the United States, and there is a hook of land that comes out, and there's a bay and the ocean. And so Beston lived on the easternmost side of this hook. So there was nothing between Beston except for, 30 feet of beach, and then all the way across the ocean was, I believe he says, Spain. And it was just really, really fantastic. I am not that given to reading books about animals, for instance, but I was really impressed by this one. One thing I really liked about this was that it is incredibly well polished. And the closest I could really think of is the essays of E.B. White. That's what this book made me think of. It is a very naturally flowing book. The prose is very beautiful and precise. Beston never assumes that we know what he's talking about, so he gives us clear information at all times. And it is a very, very well polished narrative, but you would not notice as you're reading. It's something that I only really understood in hindsight as I looked back and realized that he really, really crafted this novel very well. And it made me think of how E.B. White would write. Not that they are the same, but E.B. White was also very given to being able to craft a very casual seeming story or essay, whereas in reality he had painstakingly crafted it. And that's the feeling I got from this book, and that in no way takes away from it. It is not noticeable while you're reading it at all. It is very, very well written, and it flows so seamlessly. And I only have 2 complaints about this book. One is that there is a part where Beston is, and he says this openly, that he is basically quoting verbatim about the migration habits of butterflies. And I found it a little bit confusing, but because he was quoting someone else, really, it didn't bother me so much. It's not Beston's problem, and the truth of the matter is, my confusion may have just been my own. I understand that. But I read it several times, and I just didn't quite understand what that migration entailed. And the other complaint is that I had a very hard time trying to decide which excerpt to read in this video. There are just passages on almost every page that I could have read aloud, and it was very hard for me to decide on one. And yeah, this is just a beautiful, beautiful book. And I thought I would read another excerpt just to give another idea of the writing in this book. So this is the introduction to one of the chapters, Night on the Great Beach. Our fantastic civilization has fallen out of touch with many aspects of nature, and with none more completely than with night. Primitive folk, gathered at a cave mouth round a fire, do not fear night. They fear, rather, the energies and creatures to whom night gives power. We of the age of the machines, having delivered ourselves of nocturnal enemies, now have a dislike of night itself. With lights and ever more lights, we drive the holiness and beauty of night back to the forests and the sea. The little villages, the crossroads even, will have none of it. Are modern folk perhaps afraid of night? Do they fear that vast serenity, the mystery of infinite space, the austerity of stars? Having made themselves at home in a civilization obsessed with power, which explains its whole world in terms of energy? Do they fear at night for their dull acquiescence in the pattern of their beliefs? Be the answer what it will, today's civilization is full of people who have not the slightest notion of the character or the poetry of night, who have never even seen night. Yet to live thus, to know only artificial night, is as absurd and evil as to know only artificial day. Night is very beautiful on this great beach. It is the true other half of the day's tremendous wheel. No lights without meaning stab or trouble it. It is beauty, it is fulfillment, it is rest. Thin clouds float in these heavens, islands of obscurity in a splendor of space and stars. The Milky Way bridges earth and ocean. The beach resolves itself into a unity of form, its summer lagoons, its slopes and uplands merging. Against the western sky and the falling bow of the sun rise the silent and superb undulations of the dunes. My nights are at their darkest when a dense fog streams in from the sea under a black, unbroken floor of cloud. Such nights are rare, but are most to be expected when fog gathers off the coast in early summer. This last Wednesday night was the darkest I have known. Between 10 o'clock and 2 in the morning, 3 vessels stranded on the outer beach: a fisherman, a four-masted schooner, and a beam trawler. The fisherman and the schooner have been towed off, but the trawler, they say, is still ashore. I went down to the beach that night just after 10 o'clock. So utterly black, pitch dark it was, and so thick with moisture and trailing showers that there was no sign whatever of the beam of Nauset. The sea was only a sound, and when I reached the edge of the surf, the dunes themselves had disappeared behind. I stood as isolate in that immensity of rain and night as I might have stood in interplanetary space. The sea was troubled and noisy, and when I opened the darkness with an outlined cone of light from my electric torch, I saw that the waves were washing up green coils of seagrass, all coldly wet and bright in the motionless and unnatural radiance. Far off a single ship was groaning its way along the shoals. The fog was compact of the finest moisture. Passing by, it spun itself into my lens of light like a kind of strange, aerial and liquid silk. So there are just passages like that throughout this entire book, and it's a really wonderful, beautiful reading experience. I really, really enjoyed it. And here I'd like to stop and thank Steve Donahue, because without him I would have never known about this book. He has talked about this repeatedly over the years, and he made it sound very, very good, and that's because it is very, very good. And I think that it is beyond me really to explain how good this book is. I think it's something that just needs to be read. And because it was published in 1928, it's now out of copyright, and it is free on Project Gutenberg. And unlike in my copy, the copy on Project Gutenberg has pictures. Now they are black and white pictures, but they are still pictures. And yeah, now there are some books that I have read that I would love to just, like, I've talked about this before quite a while back, but there are several books that I've read that I would love to just like pile in my car and drive down the street and hand them out to random strangers and be like, please read this book. This has joined that rarefied shelf, so to speak, because I would love to just pile copies of this in my car and drive down the street and hand them out to random strangers and plead with them to read this, because it is a wonderful reading experience. And I wholeheartedly recommend this book to you and to anyone. So, all right, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.